Hello there. Welcome back to the booth here at Pro Tour Amonkhet. That's Luis Scott Vargas. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe. And, well, this is it, Luis. We've got one more round of draft. And, boy, do we have a nice one for you. We've got Chris Fennell and Eric Froehlich. They are faced off and ready to go in the feature match area. Let's head down for round number 11. Hello and welcome to coverage of Pro Tour Amonkhet. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe in the booth with Luis Scott Vargas, and we have reached the final round of limited play here at the Pro Tour on Saturday. We've got a nice one lined up for you here too. Two great players with very good records. Chris Fennell from the United States on Team Lingering Souls. Big smile on his face. That won't last long. He's going to be in battle mode in just a moment once the play gets underway. His opponent on the other side of the table, the Hall of Famer Eric Froehlich from Team Channel Fireball Ice. He's got his reading glasses on. That means business time, and we are off. You had a chance to look at the deck list yet, Luis?
I haven't. We actually saw, BDM and I saw Chris draft his deck. We've got a blue-green ramp deck in the hands of Chris Fennell, so trying to, play mana elements like Spring to Mind or Weaver of Currents to play payoff cards like Pull from Tomorrow and Colossipede, along with a lot of fight cards. He has 2 copies of Prepare to Fight and 3 copies of Cartouche of Strength.
Can I back you up a little there? Payoff cards like Pull from Tomorrow.
Yeah.
And Colossipede, that's his payoff?
That is one of his larger creatures. He's got a Glyph Keeper as well, which he won his first round with.
Okay. I mean, I like a Colossipede, but, I'm kind of thinking bigger, greater sandworms and stuff.
Chris, that is what the deck wants, but he ended up short on the high end. So he's going to concentrate a little more on the 4 to 6 cost cards. On the other side of the table, you have Eric Froehlich playing a black-green kind of mid-range deck. It has a -1/-1 counter theme with cards like Decimator Beetle, but so far is mostly just looking to play like medium-sized creatures and use removal spells to get opposing creatures out of the way.
I kind of like this black-green mid-range deck. It doesn't hit the fringes like some of the decks that we've seen in the feature match area today, but it does have solid game against a lot of different types of decks, and it has access to some pretty key removal spells and spells against those hyper-aggressive decks like Cartouche of Ambition and Splendid Agony, which can do good work against those low-to-the-ground decks. But, as you can see, Eric's still capable of putting out a good amount of beef on the table here. He's got Quarry Hauler that followed up a Trial of Strength. He already hit for once with the Beast as well. It's a 4/2, and Fennell's down to 16 and looking to take potentially 8 more damage here if he doesn't want to block with his payoff card there, the Colossipede.
The good news for Fennell is most tricks that Eric could have would still leave his creatures dying. So, for example, if Colossipede blocked Quarry Hauler, something like Shed Weakness or Synchronized Strike, which, as it turns out, Eric has both those in his hand, would mean the Quarry Hauler still dies. But Spider Grasp it would be a lot worse for Fennell.
So Chris just took it?
He took all 8. Whew. And a big part of the reason he would do that is that he has Prepare to Fight in hand. And he really needs to keep that Colossipede alive. He does not have very many ways to utilize Prepare to Fight. He just doesn't have that many big creatures. And this is going to be a pretty big life swing here.
It might be. I mean, Eric Froehlich has a lot of a lot of mana available now. Looks like the cat's out of the bag here as we see Synchronized Strike go on the stack, targeting both of Eric's creatures. They're going to get +2/+2 and untap. And he's just going to run the double block here to try to make sure this Colossipede goes away.
And not a whole lot Fennell can do about that. He does have Prepare to Fight. He can only cast one of his Prepares, and making Colossipede a 7/7 still would leave it dying to the two blocks here.
I would have been thinking about Final Reward as well if I were Chris, before Eric started tapping mana. In the meantime, Chris is going to order his blockers. Eric says, yep, you ordered the blockers.
Chris could cast Prepare to gain a bunch of life. It would be a gain 7 right here.
And that may have been his plan initially as well, but man, casting Prepare just to gain life doesn't seem awesome.
That was a 2-for-1 in Chris's favor. He did trade Colossipede for Synchronized Strike and Quarry Hauler.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that. Though, as you said, he does really want to have something else pretty big on the battlefield here to leverage the cards in his hand.
Chris has all fight cards in hand. He has 2 copies of, well, Prepare to Fight, so literally fight cards, and Cartouche of Strength. So he does have a Devoted Cropmate, which could pick up some of these cards, but he still would rather have something a little bit larger.
Yeah, these 2 toughness creatures, not the best for it, but it'll work. He's going to play a land and pass the turn back with, well, 3 mana available. No white mana.
Note that he played Scattered Groves, and that's not something you'd normally do when you're on 6 mana here, but Chris really wants to have access to 2 white on the same turn. Yeah. So he wants to be able to cast both copies of Prepare.
Extra prepared? What do you think Eric will make of that?
You might think that Chris just has a larger creature or like a big spell in his hand. Players do have pool deck lists.
So he knows that he doesn't have a Sandworm Convergence, for example.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
And that's part of why Eric was, I think, eager to use Synchronized Strike to trade off for Claw Speed. He just knows that Chris is high on cards that fight and low on creatures that can actually fight. So Eric wants to just get that Claw Speed off the board, even though he did, of course, 2-for-1 himself.
And when you say that they were able to see the card pools, can you explain what that means?
Eric sees all the cards Chris drafted, doesn't literally know what deck he built out of them, though it's pretty easy to make some assumptions.
Yeah.
This is one of the strengths of Chris's deck. He's not really a mana ramp deck, so trading off Weaver of Currents is something he's willing to do. Yeah. Normally that trade would not be offered.
Also, that Scattered Groves, going to do work for him. And you can see why Eric wanted to kind of clear the way here. Wants to try to get in a couple of big hits with the Horror of the Broken Lands, which he's cast post-combat.
So it looks like we're going to see a Prepare to Fight plus a Cartouche of Strength, potentially.
Prepare.
So he did end up fighting.
So like 10, right?
But not in the normal way.
Got 18.
Wow.
He should gain 12 there, I believe.
So it's going to be 5, 6,
so
2
5,
times
6.
2,
So
should
I
be
gain
12.
12.
Yeah.
20.
He's back up to 20 from 8. He's not going to exert as he doesn't have any targets in his graveyard for it. And oh boy, that was a big swing in Chris Fennell's direction.
It was literally a huge life swing. It was also putting Chris to the point where he's ahead on board. And one of the things we've seen so far, especially in the limited rounds, getting Aftermath cards into your graveyard is critical. You can't cast the literal fight half of Prepare to Fight unless it's in your graveyard. So having that there means that Eric now has to worry about that, and Chris has access to it.
Yeah, Eric doesn't have a lot of choice here. He's just going to run out his 2 threats and leave up the 1 mana for Shed Weakness. He's got a Hooded Brawler and an Initiate's Companion. But here comes Fight.
So it's a 4/3 Devoted Cropmate right now.
Yeah.
It has no good fight
doesn't
targets.
actually fight that well. Remember, the fight part of Prepare to Fight does not add power or toughness.
The good thing for Chris is if he attacks with the Devoted Cropmate, Eric doesn't naturally have a double block because the Cropmate would take up both of Eric's creatures. So Eric, if he blocks, will single block, and then the second copy of Prepare is going to be a pretty good play.
And that's exactly what happens here, except for let's not forget about Shed Weakness. Oh, but wait, there's more.
And the brutal part about that for Eric is that the Devoted Cropmate has Trample thanks to Cartouche of Strength. So
he's taken all of it?
6 points of lifelink Trample are coming in.
26.
Wow. What a blowout for Chris Fennell. Now, this wasn't really his big finish. The Oasha Cultivator wasn't what he wanted to.
No, that's what he's been setting up the whole game for.
Yeah, the big payoff has arrived. But he doesn't really need a big finish here at this point. He is going to need to find a way to get through these last 8 points of damage, however. Because remember, the Companion just went back to hand for Froehlich, so he just gets to recast that, and he still has 2 different 3-powered creatures now. So
the only reason that Chris does not have a larger advantage here, despite having a huge life total advantage, is that he only has the 1 threat. He has the 4/3 Devoted Cropmate, and even though he's got a ton of life,
yeah, look,
he's not actually closing out the game.
I mean, Eric's attacking. Like, Chris is going to block with the Cultivator and then activate it. This doesn't actually improve his mana situation significantly, but it does get 1 land out of his library and prevent 3 damage and an untap.
Also, Chris does have 2 copies of Fight in his graveyard, which means that if he can draw a larger creature, which he has very few of, that would work out. That might actually be one of the few creatures that can brawl.
Ornery Kudu?
Yeah, it's his like 3rd biggest creature.
Wow.
So Chris did end up short here. He's 2-0 so far on the pod. Clearly that hasn't cost him yet, but situations like this are where it might add up a little bit.
Yeah, we also mentioned as far as payoff cards go, pull from tomorrow. That would be absurd.
That's his best draw.
Yeah. Ooh, final reward was the card drawn for Eric Froehlich, so he is going to get a little 2 for 1.5 here. Or I should say 1 for 1.5.
Brings the players to just about even, where Chris has enough life that he can take a few hits from that Initiate's Companion, and he does have that copy of Fight in his graveyard.
1 trick left in the deck.
You hear that from Chris Fennell, so that was based on him having seen the pool, right?
Yeah, he knew that.
He was saying Eric only has 1
Yeah,
trick.
he was not only verifying that he paid attention and knew how many tricks Eric had left, but he was also making it clear how unlucky he was.
So another 2 for 1 for Chris Fennell. All right. Yeah, it reminds me of somebody I know.
Yep.
Initiate's Companion's going to chip in for 3 to knock Chris to 23, untap itself, and no play here from Froehlich.
This is actually one of my favorite parts of the
awesome.
game.
Yeah.
This is the good old-fashioned top deck war.
Absolutely.
Neither player has basically anything, and whoever draws an action spell first is going to get a huge advantage. Chris has a life total, so even though Eric is hitting with that Initiate's Companion, it's really just on who draws something great. And wow, that was a good one.
Was that a Spring to Mind?
It was.
Wow, that's really good here. He gets to spring, go get a land. He can even loot here depending on what he's got left in his hand. Yeah, he's kept an island in his hand, so he can loot that away.
Well, what he might want to do is also go...
It's tapped, yeah.
Play...
Or it's tapped, right?
Yeah.
And then I'll loot.
If he had an untapped land, yes, he would have been able to play his island and then cast Mind, but... Though he should probably... Yeah, okay, Mind goes into the graveyard, and then next turn, being able to cast Mind to draw 2 cards...
Heck yeah.
In a game, and loot with the Seeker, is in a game as close as this, it's, that's a huge swing.
Another land for Eric Froehlich.
I think that this is where Chris starts to pull ahead. This is where the Aftermath cards really shine.
Absolutely.
And this is where Blue-Green Ramp tends to have good games as well.
Here we go. Draw 2 cards off of Mind. Loot as well, so any lands that he's drawn here, which, by the way, have been quite a few.
I think he drew all lands and maybe another copy of Spring to Mind.
I see that, too. Go. What can Eric find? He found a forest. That is certainly not what he wanted, but does he have any huge... Oh, he's got a Gravedigger.
Gravedigger, Decimator Beetle are among his better draws here. Doesn't actually... Oh, he's got one Greater Swander on the left. He's got two total.
Spring.
Scaled Behemoth. Eric has more large creatures than Chris does by a fair amount.
Now, this is kind of getting interesting, too, because if you look, Fennell's library is getting a little meager here.
Pull from Tomorrow might be cast for less than the max.
Sketchy, yeah. I mean, Eric's down to 7, so Chris will probably only need a turn or 2, but he's also looting every turn, casting springs and mines.
Chris is going to try to finish this game with Glyph Keeper. That's his win condition at this point.
Was that Decimator Beetle? No.
It could be a Decimator Beetle. We'll see what happens when it draws a card next.
Yeah, Watchful Naga was what Eric drew there. And I think he has a Synchronized Strike in his hand as well.
Eric does have 2 copies of that card.
Yeah, so he could potentially draw a few extra cards there, maybe even plow through a blocker.
And then that pull from Tomorrow means that...
he drew it?
Basically, Chris needs to count.
This is where Eric Froehlich kind of shakes his head.
7 cards in his deck.
He has 7 left?
And he needs 2 turns to win with Glyph Keeper.
So if it's the bottom card or the second to bottom card, he could still be in trouble.
He could.
And Eric's...
Though Chris has used one cartouche of strength, if he saves both cartouches of strength, he could put them both on Glyph Keeper and attack for 7. Though because Glyph Keeper
one fizzles,
counters its own ability, you would need to target it with another card.
Which he has fight.
He has Vizier of Tumbling Sands.
And that too. Yes. We're going deep here, kids. And we're going to see Cartouche of Strength to fight the Watchful Naga, and that's going to prompt Eric Froehlich to use his Synchronized Strike right now because he knows that even getting a single extra card off of it next turn could be the difference.
And the advantage here for Fennell of the Cartouche of Strength is it is optional to fight.
Yes.
So if you force your opponent to respond with a trick...
He didn't know?
And then you choose not to fight was what I was going to follow it up with. But
wow.
Certainly he can choose to fight.
We have now seen, it is not the normal way to template those cards, and that has gotten some very high-level limited players over the last couple of weeks. But it is absolutely a May ability. Eric's going to... So back to business here in Nashville. So Chris Fennell finds himself up a game. Eric drew a lot of lands down the stretch there, and Chris was really able to leverage some of the card draw spells like Spring to Mind that he had in his deck to propel him into that late stalemate section that you were talking about.
Right. Essentially, both players drew a lot of lands, but Chris had 2 copies of Spring to Mind and a Seeker of Insight, so he saw like 6, 7 more cards than Eric did, which, that's enough to make a difference, especially in a top deck war. And that's one of the advantages that the blue-green ramp deck has. It does win late games fairly well. The disadvantage in terms of for Chris's deck is he doesn't have very many creatures with power toughness, but enough card draw, he's been able to overpower his opponents regardless of that. So Chris is looking to potentially 3-0 here. It's also important to note that how good his deck is just matters relative to the other decks at the table. And after watching 2 of the decks be drafted and looking at the other decks, the table was not overly powerful.
Okay, players getting ready for their opening hands here. Well, that looks like
a nice little opener for Chris Fennell.
It looks fine from here, doesn't it? So I would suspect that Fennell's going to keep that one. Let's see if Eric also has a keeper. Looks like he's thinking about it a little longer. Well, he's got a keeper too, it looks like.
So from a brief glance at Eric's hand, he had combat tricks and greater sandworms. Which
the only creatures were the sandworms?
So
yeah, that's not good.
Yeah, 100% of the time when you see a hand of 4 land, 3 spells, and limited, you start out happy.
I glanced at it and thought, well, I've seen enough, but the consistency of that hand didn't actually look that great, did it?
Yeah, it was a little sandy. Eric wasn't a fan.
So Reed Duke has won his match 2-0, by the way, over Kelvin Chu. Reed is now 8-3. So he is still in contention for top 8, but we've got a long way to go today.
Eric snapped off 1-lander on the play there, it looks like, but he scryed and kept, and, well,
okay,
the cat's out of the bag.
This is a nice little 3-powered attacker, perhaps to start pressuring Chris Fennell, who, well, he found his best blocker, though, here. A Labyrinth Guardian on turn 2 really does the trick against the early aggression from really any deck. I've been a big fan of it. Though Eric does have a pair of synchronized strikes that he can use to kind of make it work. Wow, he's just going to take his medicine here, though, and trade off. And that's because he wants to clear the way for a Watchful Naga.
And had Eric had a Synchronized Strike in hand, I think he would likely have not offered that trade, because Synchronized Strike plays very nicely against Labyrinth Minotaur or Labyrinth Guardian. You just target the Guardian and your own creature, and then the Guardian dies from its ability, and then you get to smash in for a bunch.
Here's an interesting scenario. Eric's going to certainly exert the Watchful Naga. Is Chris going to trade? He really wants to keep.
In most cases, I would say no.
Yeah. But, you know, the second time you get hit by a Watchful Naga drawing a card, it starts to kind of slip away a little bit. Hooded Brawler's the follow-up for Froehlich.
I don't know if that's the official name of Hooded Brawler.
That is the official name of Hooded Brawler.
That was decisive.
I knew where you were going.
Eric does now have a Synchronized Strike in hand, which is conveniently a combination with the multiple Exert snakes he has in play. Actually, technically not snakes. These are Nagas. There are also snakes in the set.
Froehlich with the Naga tribal deck, though. You really need a Ronus in there to make that complete.
So Chris lacking white mana to cast Prepare here, but he's got a lot of ways to find it in his deck.
Seeker of Insight's the play here, but he's also got 3 mana left over. What else does he want to do? Well, he's going to go for the Cartouche.
And I hope Eric does not have Shed Weakness.
Yeah, he really was going to hope that that wasn't the case, and it wasn't.
Especially since, given what happened game 1, I would expect Chris to then, once again, assume he had to fight.
Yeah, you know, it was weird. I did see him pause just ever so slightly as he put his card in the graveyard.
It's possible he realized it on the way
he
out.
might have been like, oh, no, that isn't the same thing. Ooh, here's Decimator Beetle, though, for Froehlich. And this is a type of card that, if left unchecked, can really run away with a game.
And this is where Chris's deck, again, has problems. Chris has a lot of ways to remove opposing creatures. They're all cards that involve fighting. Eric has now a 4/5 in play, and Chris just has very few creatures that are equipped to fight that.
Yeah, and you know, it just gets worse and worse, because even though, you know, when you read the Decimator Beetle at first, it looks like, okay, I'll take a counter from my thing, put it on your thing, but it's not actually that. It's actually two separate. It's removing one and just putting one out of the air onto your opponent's creature as well.
I would suspect most people would not make that mistake.
Do you have something for this?
Unless they're maybe reviewing cards
Yeah.
for the first time.
Literally. But yeah, of course, you know, those -1/-1 counters hitting Chris Fennell's creatures are going to make his fight cards worse and worse, and he has a lot of them. What does he have, 4 or 5 fight cards?
He has
in the
3
deck?
Cartouches of Strength and 2 Prepared to Fight.
So 5 of them?
I was looking for a token. It's been like 2 seconds. Go.
Chris is going to play a land and pass the turn back to Froehlich, and this is a big deal. You know, this first attack with the Decimator Beetle signifies he can start getting in, and if Eric has a way to protect it, you know, combat trick like Synchronized Strike that we know he's got in his hand, that is the type of thing that can let this Beetle kind of run away with the game.
Eric has all sorts of options here. He's got Cartouche of Ambition, Shed Weakness, and Synchronized Strike.
He's going to lead off with the Cartouche. That will allow him to kill a 2 toughness creature here if you'd like, in conjunction with the Beetle attack.
And so now Eric has to decide whether he wants to attack and exert Watchful Naga. He can remove the counter.
Yep.
And he has Shed Weakness, but the problem is if Chris then double blocks, Eric has to use Shed Weakness and still loses the Watchful Naga.
Right, and he could get a card out of it. It's just, that could be a potential.
Float one.
He's going to play. I thought it was going to be Winds of Rebuke, but it's not. He's going to cycle Vizier of the Tumbling Sands, or of Tumbling Sands, and
Float
Draw a card. He's got 3 mana floating.
He's going off.
Yeah.
They're not sure to what end, but he's
they're all colorless, right? I don't think he can do much with it, but...
Okay.
Oh, and he's going to take the hit from the beetle, so that's a
10-point
life swing there.
1325.
Boom. Eric Froehlich creeping ever further ahead, and Chris Fennell really needs to find an answer for this Decimator beetle, or it's really going to live up to its name. All right, Cartouche of Strength, number 2, and he's going to target the Watchful Naga. Ooh, but Eric with that shed weakness.
Just threw that one, I guess.
Chris,
And
correctly identifying
he
that Eric
is
did not
right.
have that earlier.
yeah, that 2 turns ago, he knew that Eric had green mana up and would have used it. So he says, oh, you must have just drawn it. Eric does not seem to mind either way.
Unfortunately for Eric, that does save his Watchful Naga, but doesn't actually let him win the fight, assuming Chris would still elect to do so.
So instead of attacks, Chris is just going to go ahead and loot with his Seeker of Insight, trying to find more action. He's going to discard a card that he cannot cast right now.
Go.
Devoted Cropmate. He doesn't have access to white mana, it looks like. Pass the turn back to Froehlich, who once again gets to kind of gleefully untap with the Decimator Beetle in play. Again, every turn that goes by with that Beetle, Chris Fennell's chance of winning this game spiral further and further down.
Yep.
Eric also gets to attack with both Synchronized Strike. He could target or exert the Watchful Naga, and then he could, if you would like, Synchronized Strike targeting the Labyrinth Guardian and his Watchful Naga.
That's exactly what he's going to do. So now, no good blocks here for Chris Fennell. He's simply got a 1-2. And you see Eric remember his trigger for the Decimator Beetle there as well. That's why he was pointing at his creatures and Chris's. And Chris Fennell finds himself.
So I guess I should probably 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. No, it's 11.
You can hear him doing the combat math here and trying to decide if it's time to block or not.
And he can take 11 and fall to 2. Eric would gain 7 and go to 32, but that's going to happen anyway.
7, 8, 9, 10, 11. All right, take it.
Chris says, I'm taking it.
No, it's... Oh, yeah, you do. Yeah. And you're at 30.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. It's 2 less because he didn't Synchronize Strike the Beetle. It was the Labyrinth Guardian.
Right, he killed the Guardian. So it's 30-4. Eric Froehlich, dominant in both life total and board position, though he is down a game to Chris Fennell here, so he needs to pick up this victory to force a game 3.
Also, this is one of the disadvantages to playing 3 colors. Clearly, you understand that sometimes you don't draw your 3rd color, and in this particular case, Chris has a uncastable white card in hand. He has Prepare in his hand, which has not been prepared to cast.
Right, and that really has hurt him here. Eric has a pretty stacked hand at this point. He's got a Greater Sandworm, and I think he just drew maybe a Scaled Behemoth there.
He has access to both those things, so...
Yeah, he's on 5 mana now, so we may see the greatest of Sandworms get cycled, but in either case, he's got Fennell down to 2 with just 1 creature left on the battlefield. There goes the worm, but I think he drew a Ornery Kudu that he can actually just cast here. And that has nice synergies, once again, with the Beetle. Also, it's just a lethal threat.
And I think we're going to see Chris pack them up here, though.
Ooh, was that Pull from Tomorrow?
He needed that a turn earlier.
Yeah.
Had he been able to cast a Pull from Tomorrow for 5 last turn, then he might be able to play enough creatures and removal spells in the same turn to stabilize. At this point, he doesn't have a turn left to cast Pull. And trying to cast Pull for less in order to try to hit a blocker is not a way that you're gonna pull ahead. You're just gonna fall behind.
Yeah, it's interesting because this also tests, Chris's knowledge of his own deck list. What are the types of things that he can still cast after Pull from Tomorrow?
Good.
And it looks like he's going to go in the tank for a minute and then just say, just go. He may just not have outs.
He can draw Winds of Rebuke, potentially.
Yeah, you see he's got 2 mana set aside there. I wouldn't be shocked to see a Pull from Tomorrow for 3. Yeah, here he goes. Winds of Rebuke would keep him alive for the turn, though the prospects still don't look great long term, even if he hits it. Is that an Aven win guide? Yeah, it was. But again, another white card that he can't cast.
Yep.
And Eric calmly moves to combat. He drew his other synchronized strike, so he is going to make yet another lethal threat, and Chris Fennell's going to pack it in. So we're going to get a game 3, and I got to say, I'm excited. This has been a really fun match between these two players here, and I'm glad we get to watch a game 3.
Oh, yeah. We haven't actually seen Chris cast a huge Pull from Tomorrow yet. We almost got to the brink of that in game 1.
All right, looks like we have a little chance here while our players sideboard to take a quick look in at one of our side tables here. The only one still running. That's Michael Majors, you see, in the Team Genesis shirt. And, also in the Team Genesis shirt here is Martin Mueller. So
Yeah,
we've got a little Team Genesis mirror match here.
We're going to see where their draft percentage goes from here. And Martin Mueller kicking things off aggressively like we saw him when he played against Li Shijian.
I had a quick chat, by the way, with some of the fine folks from Team Genesis, Martin Dang, Brad Nelson, and Chris Larson were over there chatting, and they were telling me about their limited performance here, and I'm sure Rich and Maria will apprise you to that after we finish the draft round, but holy smokes, they have been crushing it.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see what they did, what they ended up drafting, how they ended up getting to that position.
Well, Michael Majors is under some level of assault here from Martin Mueller, but he's going to go for an unburden. Probably not what he wants to do here on turn 3 ideally, but hey.
Much less in the face of a Thresher Lizard.
He'll take it. Yeah. Pump spell.
If Martin draws a land here, he just plays another Thresher Lizard, gives it haste, and just attacks for 8.
Well, he's just going to have to play another Thresher Lizard, give it haste, and attack for 6. And wow, this one could be over quickly. This is game 3, by the way.
This game is almost done, unless Michael Majors has like a Sweltering Suns or something along those lines.
Yeah, somebody give me an advantage bar here. I'll know where to put that one.
Say no more.
Thank you, Luis. It's only 4 damage.
Well, on the other hand,
Martin didn't play anything. He's got...
Martin does have Electrify in hand, so if he can draw a land here...
Yeah, he's also got Magma Spray. Ooh, he hit the land.
Yeah.
Mountain off the top, so kill your Manticore. Psst. Though it is still just 4 non-lethal, so he's down to 2.
Michael's
he just has nothing in hand.
Swamps.
Wow, and the hyper-aggressive deck gets there yet again. Martin Mueller defeating Michael Majors there. The 2 teammates battling it out. Matchup looked horrible for Majors from the little slice that we saw there.
Can't hear a word you're saying if you're talking. Yeah, you got to do like...
Turns out Michael Major just had a draw where his plays were turn 2 cycle, turn 3 unburden you when you have Thresher Lizard and Bloodlust Insider in play.
And another Thresher Lizard in hand, by the way.
Yeah,
it's just not going to go great. You really have to be on the board. All right, we're underway here in Game 3. Chris Fennell versus Eric Froehlich. Chris is trying to stay undefeated. He's 10-0. And Eric trying to keep that top 8 in sight. He's 9-1 with a win here to finish off the draft round. He can enter the constructed rounds with a lot of wiggle room if he manages to keep up here.
So,
all right, a little bit of a slow start here from Froehlich. He's got the Watchful Naga, but as you can see, Chris Fennell is able to power out a turn 4 Colossopede thanks to Vizier of Tumbling Sands acting as kind of a de facto mana creature. Uh-oh. What does Eric have? Ooh, he's got twin Watchful Naga here. Now, that could help him dig back out at some point, but he is pretty far behind on board as it sits.
Though Eric does have a final reward in hand, so if he's able to final reward the Colossopede, attack, and draw 2 cards, then things would change dramatically. This is the turn where Chris needs to cast, his various fight cards.
He does have an opening, but I think he's going to go for, Cartouche of Strength on the Colossopede. He says, you may choose the one. So Colossopede's now a 6/6 with trample. It has taken 2 damage this turn, but the way is still clear as long as Chris doesn't care about Shed Weakness.
And I think that's a trade he wouldn't be too unhappy with.
No.
The real question is, does he want to attack and let Eric draw a card off Exerting Watchful Naga? The unfortunate part for Chris is if he doesn't attack, Eric just goes final reward and does it anyway. And Chris ends up missing out on 6 points of damage.
Chris doesn't know that part, and man, it's hard to give up 6 points of damage, isn't it? No, he's not. He's like, I don't want you to have the card. So Froehlich just needs to go land, which he drew and had. And the shields are fully down here, so he's just going to main phase final reward, and he gets to exert the Naga that the way is clear and draw himself a card, and we're right back to even. Now Chris Fennell just needs one of his haymakers. He's already got one in the graveyard, and yeah, I'm talking about Colossopede, but he does have a couple other cards left in his deck that'll do good work for him. Pull from Tomorrow and a Glyph Keeper are 2 cards that come to mind that could really swing this game back in his direction. Looks like he's lining up a even win guide here. Card that we saw him discard last game because he never found white mana, but Spring found it for him this time.
Vizier of Tumbling Sands has some interesting plays here. Can untap his planes in order to cast Prepare to Fight. Can set up ambushes at various points in the game, and Chris chose not to attack with it, even into a Watchful Naga that was not untapping, perhaps worried about various untap effects.
Here's a Decimator Beetle, though, for Eric Froehlich. We saw this card do seriously good work for him in the first game, and Chris Fennell didn't really seem to have an answer for it. What even does he have by way of actual answers for a Decimator Beetle?
He can have one of his larger creatures fight, but that's about it.
Yeah, he doesn't have removal. Floodwaters, though, that is a major tempo swing, though he is only backing that up with an attack for 3. So for a long-term game plan, it seems unlikely to work.
This is not... It's more of a delaying tactic than anything else, and I don't think Eric's going to be all that worried about it.
He probably wasn't even that sad to see that. Remember, that cost Chris a full card out of his hand and only set Eric back a little bit. I mean, sure, he doesn't get to start attacking with the Decimator Beetle quite yet, but...
There we go.
Oh, now that's one that he wanted to see. In fact, he would have preferred that last turn, I think.
Yeah.
Angler Drake.
That makes it actually... in some ways rougher for Eric because he knows that Chris just drew that Angler Drake, or he's fairly sure that that's what happened. And seeing that get played now means he knows that Chris top deck, and it's going to make his game a lot harder to win.
Yeah, now for sure, Chris Fennell is in the lead here with 6 power in the air, and Froehlich down to 14. There are cards that Eric can find to help get him out of this mess. And he's going to need them pretty quickly. Chris is looking at how much damage he can do in the air, and he actually does have a 2-turn clock here. He just needs to use Prepare on one of the 2 turns to make it 6, 6, and 2.
One of the ways that Chris gets himself into trouble here potentially is if he casts Prepare to Fight and Eric has like multiple tricks. But with only 3 mana, that's going to be pretty difficult.
Yeah, Eric's got a Splendid Agony in his hand.
But it's a 6/6 Angler Drake fighting a 3/4 Decimator Beetle, which the math does not work out well for Eric, even if he has a +2/+2 trick in hand, or -2/-2 trick, as it turns out.
Okay, well, he's got Spidery Grasp to save it.
And that was a trick Fennell hadn't seen. So
perhaps out of the sideboard even.
Eric has 3 copies of Spidery Grasp, none are in his main deck. So.
Super Trend 8 toughness. 6 damage on it. I gain 6. 20.
Okay.
24. Yeah, you're at 14, right?
So it's a 5/8 Decimator Beetle.
With reach.
That currently has reach.
And also has 6 damage assigned to it, so Eric doesn't really have blocks this turn.
So Chris can offer the trade with the even win guide, but yeah, not attacking with the Angler Drake makes sense.
Yeah, he'd like to preserve his big threat. And this has very much become a race. What Eric wants to see is a card like Cartouche of Ambition to help start swinging that race back in his favor.
I believe that was his draw step. So
really?
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
oh, it was. Right off the top. This is a huge swing for Eric Froehlich.
Yep.
Because remember, in addition to that, he gets to take this counter out, put a counter down, and I mentioned before, he's got Splendid Agony to put 2 more -1/-1 counters wherever he wants, perhaps on the Angler Drake.
So he's got a 5/6 Decimator Beetle, so
How many cards? 3?
Chris doesn't even have plausible blocks to begin with, and then the Splendid Agony makes it even worse.
Wow, that Cartouche was a seriously good draw for Eric Froehlich, because if you look at the rest of what Eric has in his hand, you'll see that he has a much more grindy type hand with the Gravedigger you see there, and then he just replayed the Watchful Naga. These are the type of cards that need a little time, and he was not going to be given much time given the air assault that he was under from Fennell.
His 2-turn clock has turned into like a 5-turn clock.
Yeah.
And realistically, that there is actually not an actual turn number attached to that, because that Decimator Beetle is going to keep getting hits in.
Yeah, and you also note here that Eric has left up his Splendid Agony, and with all of those fight cards being really the only good ways to remove a huge life-linking threat like a Decimator Beetle, he is quite content to keep that up.
No.
Warning for you for slow play. I need you to take your turns a little bit faster than you are currently taking.
Can I appeal it?
Certainly.
It's on video. That was literally like less than 3 seconds.
So take guys, I'll be right back.
It's not like I don't have decisions.
Yes, continue playing.
All right, so that was the judge issuing a slow play warning for Chris playing a little too slowly, and Chris is going to appeal it. But in the meantime, the players get to keep playing. So we'll let the judges do what they do, and
continue playing until you're not on. So sorry, you will have an extra minute for this.
Yeah, I heard the beginning part, but I couldn't hear it.
As I said, the head judge is on his way, but we want you to continue playing for
Draw 2.
all right, so we are still underway here.
That's a somewhat aggressive slow play warning. Well, at least Chris doesn't mind drawing some extra cards.
Okay, so he played a Naga Vitalist, and now he's going to chip in there for 2 more in the air. But again, this race has become untenable for Fennell.
Can you hear me? You can check the video. Like, I drew from my main phase. I set my card. I looked at the board for less than 2 seconds, maybe 3 seconds, and he tried to give me a slow play warning. I have not been playing that slow. I don't understand that. I think that's unbelievable.
So my judge says he's warned you before to play faster. At least encouraged you, and that particular turn he counted to at least 15. So I don't believe that was 2 or 3 seconds.
There's no way he counted to 15 after I took my draw step. Maybe at the end step, he started counting at his end step before I untapped, but
So I trust my judge on this, and you are issued a warning. And if ever you go to turns, you will have to issue turns.
How much extra time do we also have? Started over 3 minutes.
So you could hear it. So
For this ruling,
Chris was issued a warning that is
Each one 1 minute?
no,
there's no penalty for it. It is just a way to track. So there won't be anything like that. Eric's just making sure that the time extension is appropriate.
I know I passed the turn at 7:30 and it's at 4:10.
This clock
No,
is-
I'm just saying I can know how much time it's been for the
So-
whole
so-
cycle of everything.
Gotcha. In
I
addition,
don't know how much it should be. I know it's now been 3.5 minutes since we started,
We'll use
but
this
there was
clock.
multiple stops.
We'll use the clock on the phone plus
Okay.
2 extra turns if needed.
I stopped him
Plus
when
1 minute, plus 2 turns?
No, the one that's here. So we
That
have
clock?
7
Oh,
minutes
okay.
from now.
Yeah, there's no reason to add
No
it.
problem. I didn't
plus
know.
2 extra turns
I
at the
didn't
end. Okay.
No problem.
My guess is that we do not burn through this time, but if Chris is able
Yeah.
to deal with that decimator beetle, you never know.
Yeah, that's true.
And players basically always want a match to come to a conclusion. It's really in no one's best interest to draw, unless you're going to lose that turn. But in a vacuum, a draw is just not what the outcome the players want. They want to determine a winner.
Block.
All right, so Eric Froehlich put up -1/-1 counter on the Drake, and Chris saw the writing on the wall and said, I'm just going to block. But Eric gets more life, and now he's going Gravedigger, get back my guy, replay my guy, go. So we've got Watchful Naga ×2 plus a Gravedigger, and that was a huge swing for Eric Froehlich. Wow. Going back to that cartouche of ambition, the game has just spiraled out of control for Chris Fennell since that turn. And Chris's deck is not really well set up to beat a creature that big with lifelink. He has a few ways to do it. He can bounce it with Winds of Rebuke, or he can find something bigger on his side to fight, but he just doesn't have those huge creatures. You know, a greater Sandworm would have gone a long way in his deck.
So, yeah, one of the key picks of the draft, Chris took a Cartouche of Strength over a Greater Sandworm.
Ooh, how about a Glyph Keeper now, though?
Glyph Keeper is good. It can't even get hit by Decimator Beetle. At least it counters the first instance of something. But will it be enough to stabilize against Decimator Beetle? It doesn't look quite there.
Yeah, I was just taking a look at Eric Froehlich's hand as we have it right now, and those two cards really can be used in conjunction
1918.
to keep Decimator Beetle alive and tacking even through a multiple block in some scenarios. All right, so Chris is actually going to use his Vizier of Tumbling Sands to fizzle the ability there on Glyph Keeper so that he may now cast a Cartouche of Strength. But, oh no.
And we'll see. Yep.
Oh no, Chris still hadn't realized that Cartouche of Strength is a May ability. Eric Froehlich cast a pump spell there, shed weakness, and Chris just put his creature in the graveyard.
And there's no question, Chris would have chosen not to continue that fight if he knew.
100%.
And
now you see how quickly Eric is playing. He knows he's in the driver's seat to improve to 10-1, and he just needs to make sure that he gets the job done in time. Again, having looked at the other players' pool, you know, Eric can be clear that he's not going to face any type of sweeper or any effect like that. A land off the top for Fennell has to be frustrating for him, as there was a point in this game where it looked like he was way ahead. Floodwaters into Angler Drake looked pretty darn good for Fennell. But now he's way behind. He is going to use the Embalm.
I don't know if the glyphs will be kept this game. I think that the glyphs are very unsafe.
Yeah, they do seem like they're at risk, don't they? He's going to chip in for 1 damage. Eric's going to fall down to 22. Oh, Scaled Behemoth off the top, too. The hits just keep coming for Eric Froehlich. That was a big draw step. He was already way ahead, and that may just seal the deal for him.
So one of the interesting things about the Cartouche plays, Eric knows how Cartouche Strength works. You know, I'm confident of that. he might play differently against Chris Fennell now, knowing that Chris has demonstrated that he's willing to, be
let his
forced to
future fight anyway. Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting to see how that changes your gameplay in future situations. This is the last round of draft, so it won't matter here. But I suspect Chris will be hearing about this from his friends and/or teammates.
Oh
yeah. No, but Eric says, but wait, there's more. I've got Splendid Agony here as well. And this could be the nails in the coffin for Chris Fennell. Now, the good news for Chris, though, he has not lost yet.
I thought you were going to say the good news was there's
no good news here.
Because there is a skill.
This game is over. Eric Froehlich wins the match 2-1. No good news for Chris Fennell in that game, but he is still 10-1 and in a very good position heading into the standard rounds to put himself in a spot to make a run for top 8. Now he's going to have to keep trucking forward here, but he liked his deck, Black-White Zombies from yesterday, and if he can keep that thing under wraps, as it were, could easily find himself in the top 8. And welcome back to the booth here in Nashville. That's Luis Scott Vargas. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe. Thank you so much for joining us. And that will do it, of course, for the limited portion of our Pro Tour. It was exciting. A lot of players on polar opposites with their decks, and I like seeing that. Interesting stuff. But it is time now for us to move on to Standard. So we'll be back with that after these messages.
Hello and welcome back to the news desk. Maria Bartholdi here. It is currently lunch here at Pro Tour Amonkhet, and the players are eating. They're having some food. The crew is having some food, but you and me, we're going to hang out, and we've got a lot of interesting stuff coming up for you. We've got interviews from the floor. We're going to have a morning review as we talk about the shape of Limited and that sort of thing. We're going to be able to take a look inside research and development coming up, as well as another Enter the Battlefield, which will be really cool because this time we're going to be talking about cosplay, and those Enter the Battlefield pieces are really beautiful. I saw the one yesterday. It was so awesome to get a look inside the life of people who are big influencers on Magic. But before we get to all of that, we've got our very own Brian David Marshall down on the floor with Martin Mueller, who's a member of a team that's recently been killing it out here at Pro Tour Amonkhet.
Thanks, Maria. I'm here with Martin Mueller of Team Genesis. Martin, you guys crushed the limited rounds. 27-7 in 2 matches we haven't figured out the outcomes of yet.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. Like I really think a lot of the teammates really did a lot of the drafts, and even like some of the people not on the 6-man team really did. Like Christopher Larsen, I think he did like 100 drafts before this PT. So there was a lot of opinions, and the opinions was really good. So that just made it really easy for people to actually know what was good and do well. So that's great.
Well, now that the draft rounds are over at the PT, we all want to know what's good. What should we be doing in this draft format?
Yeah, in Limited, like I think white is by far the best color. It's so deep and has a lot of late game power because you can bring your creatures back as zombies, and has like the best common Ghostwalker, and like just a really solid color. So I think that's probably where you want to be because it's deep, so you can draft that often, and it's the best color.
Now, 5-1 in Limited. You're pretty excited to get back to Standard. I know you're playing a deck we've seen before, but maybe something with a little bit of a twist.
Yeah, I 5-0'd yesterday with the Rock Marvel, but with the Big Chandler. It's still legal. Yeah, so I really like that deck even before this tournament, and I definitely don't like it less now.
All right, we're going to try to get you or someone from your team over at the wall to talk about that deck at some point today. Probably you guys were in first place going into the last round. You've done nothing to hurt yourselves in the team standings for this event. What would it mean for you guys to be like top 4 heading to Kyoto?
That would definitely mean that it's way more important to do well, because it's awesome if you can be on the first like team worlds. So yeah, I definitely think if you're going to be 4th, we're going to really try to step it up for the next one.
Now, you've won a pretty significant team tournament in the past. How different is that than an individual win?
I think it's so much more fun to win with your friends. It just feels great, and yeah, that is like better than winning a normal tournament for sure.
Yeah, of course, his team results may be a little different. You know, when your friend rips a Dune Blast at the last possible moment, that certainly leads to some exhilarating highs. Martin Mueller, he's on an exhilarating high right now. I mean, just look at him. But Team Genesis in great shape heading into the last leg of Pro Tour Amonkhet.
Thanks so much, BDM. All right, let's take a look at our overall leaderboard for Pro Tour Amonkhet. They're sitting in first place, Chris Fennell, 10-1. Eric Froehlich also at 10-1. Martin Mueller, who we just heard from, Team Genesis, who is just slaying, also at 10-1. Christian Calcano, who we've heard from earlier this morning, had a great draft yesterday and another good one today, sitting at 9-2. Ray Perez Jr. also at 9-2. Pierre Dejean had the pleasure of watching him draft earlier with Ian Duke, currently sitting at 9-2. Li Shitian ranked 8th in the world at 9-2. Ken Yukihiro, Team Musashi, who is gunning for the top spot there, sitting at 9-2. So Ian, we've had a fantastic morning here at Pro Tour Amonkhet. Why don't you just talk me through a little bit of what Limited looks like for you right now, and are you happy as a member of R&D with the shape of the format?
Yeah, I've been very happy in general with how the format played out. I got a lot of varied perspectives from different players about which colors they thought were best, which colors they were trying to avoid, and so on. By and large, what I've heard from most people is that the baseline of the format is that it's very aggressive. If you can get in on a white-red or white-blue aggressive deck, you do want to do that whenever possible. But that said, draft is self-balancing in the sense that if everyone is competing for those strategies, then no one's going to get a great version of the deck. So you do need to be able to go that next level up and think about what happens if those colors aren't open in my seat, if I'm not positioned to have an aggressive deck, how do I make one of those slower decks work? And a lot of that, I think, revolves around getting on board early and using some of the tools that we've put into the environment to combat aggressive decks like Cartouche of Ambition, like Festering Mummy, so on and so forth.
How hard is it to balance a limited format like that?
In general, it takes a lot of work. Our sets are in design and development for upwards of a year or more. So we're constantly working and iterating on the format, changing the cards, changing how they work, changing the numbers. A lot of the challenges unique to Amonkhet and unique to any set really revolve around the mechanics in that particular set. So for Amonkhet, one of the big challenges was making Exert work without being overbearing on that front. Exert by its nature is an aggressive mechanic. It only works when your creatures are attacking. We wanted those strategies to be successful, to deliver on that theme, but we wanted to do it in a way that gave sort of an endgame inevitability for the aggressive decks rather than just making the format hyper fast, because we wanted things like Embalm, like Cycling, like -1/-1 counters to also show up and allow for those strategies to flourish.
Perhaps on a personal note, you put a lot of yourself into this design work. What are you most proud of in the limited format for Amonkhet?
Oh gosh, that's a tough question. You're really putting me on the spot. Really what I'm looking for as someone who's on the design teams but bringing a game balance type perspective, I really just look at how did the format as a whole turn out and did we get lots of different things to work? And on that front, I've been really, really happy here this weekend. Seeing things like Martin uses blue-red spell deck yesterday morning.
So awesome.
Seeing Gerard Fabiano's multicolored nonsense, I guess I'd call it. So always cool to see that stuff working out. And then again, as well as the aggressive decks also showing their strength as well this weekend.
What should people at home who are perhaps looking to emulate some of the stuff they've seen here at the Pro Tour, what should they do as, say, they're going to their local game store to play Draft or firing up Magic Online?
I think it really depends on what speaks to you as a limited player, as a Magic player in general. If you're someone who likes getting into the red zone, getting out that early aggression, by all means, this format will let you do it. Pick up those, 14th pick Slither Blades and just send them on in there. But if you're somebody who likes to make the more slower controlling games work or ramp into big stuff, we've also seen plenty of that here this weekend. So it's all about just knowing what you want your deck to do, focusing on that, and also be prepared to defend yourself early in the game.
Thanks so much, Ian. Well, Amonkhet, pyramids of pantheons, gods and god pharaohs, helper zombies doing your laundry and bearing your fans. But most importantly, the afterlife. And how do we represent that in Magic? Well, the graveyard, of course. Our own Rich Hagan interviewed members of Magic R&D to learn how they crafted graveyard interactions in Amonkhet to give the dead a second life.
Not every set uses it, but when it does, the consequences can be grave. It's time to go yard with the graveyard.
One of the things, if you just study, Egyptian mythology and stuff, is they were obsessed with death. Death was a really big part of their culture, and so we knew that, we had to somehow incorporate that. And so we knew the graveyard was going to be a component going in. We knew that from the earliest possibility that the graveyard had to matter in some way because death had to matter in some way.
One of the really exciting moments was when we finally figured out what the embalm mechanic was going to be. We knew we wanted to capture this process of mummification because this is a thing that just fascinates people. The canopic jars and the weird hooks that they use to pull people's brains out through their noses and all this creepy, weird, morbid stuff. And it's these are the funerary rites of the Egyptians, and they were really serious about them. They were very Baroque, right?
Temet is the King Tut analog here. That's where we're calling back to. He's supposed to be a centerpiece to an Embalm deck. He's helping give your Embalm tokens a way to get through in the late game. Certainly you can, of course, play this with other cards that generate tokens if you're more excited about those or have decks with tokens already, but he's supposed to be giving you some late game with all the mummies that you're bringing back from the grave.
Heartpiercer Manticore is a card I love, mainly because I like to imagine two of them together, where one of them throws the other one at your opponent, and then the second one comes back and throws the first one at your opponent, and then the first one comes back and throws the zombie version of the second one at your opponent again. Amonkhet's a fun place.
we wanted the gameplay to match the sense of kind of the mechanics say, you kind of want to march your creatures to their death. Like there's a resource of creatures being in the graveyard. So you act a little bit differently because, for example, if I have something that I can bring back out, I'm more aggressive with it. You know, it dying or me sacrificing it, that's okay because I know I can bring it back.
When we are looking at graveyard cards and designing cards with mechanics like Embalm, which have the kind of inherent extra power of this is almost just 2 cards stapled together, there's a kind of careful balancing act between making cards that are satisfying to read and appear powerful when you first see them and cards that play powerfully.
So in most cases, the mechanics here are not such that you're just trying to fill up your graveyard immediately with a bunch of cards. More so, it's we're hoping, and there will be exceptions, of course, but that you'll naturally play your cards. You're gonna only be drawing a spell every other turn or so. Eventually, you run out of things that you can do usefully with your hand, and then it starts becoming, oh, look at, now that I've drawn these extra lands and have more mana, here are all these things that I can start doing with my graveyard that are just kind of freebies in a sense. Like, in many cases you're getting cards that were already pretty effective on their own rates, and now like, oh, now that I have 5 mana or 6 mana or whatever here, I can get this creature again effectively for free out of my graveyard by taking my turn to use that card out of my graveyard.
Okay, so here's one of the cool things we did with Embalm is for every single creature, when you embalm it, there's a token. And what we did is every single creature has its own embalm token. So we did parallel art for every single embalm creature. So when you get your embalm creatures, you can go find the matching thing. And when you embalm it, you can get the actual art that matches, that's embalmed of your creature. And then the art team did a cool thing where all the different creatures have a different sort of shape to them so that they look really cool when you embalm them.
The idea for having separate tokens was mine, and I thought to myself, this is a tall order. Like a token specifically associated with one and no other cards is a lot to ask. And so I went to Jeremy Jarvis, who is the in charge of all the art direction for Magic, and it's like, Jeremy, if you don't think this is a good idea, I'm not going to pursue it, because this basically asks a lot of the art team, right? And he really liked the idea.
And so we have both black zombies that live outside the gates and white zombies that live inside. And the reason we did that is we knew 2 blocks back, we had a zombie theme, and that had black and blue zombies. So what we wanted to do was have some overlap. So we gave you more black zombies and more zombie matter cards in black, so you can interconnect with that. But we also gave you something different. Now there's white zombies. So there's blue zombies and black zombies and white zombies, and you can mix and match and make whatever zombie deck you like.
The idea for white mummies evolved somewhat organically. We knew that we could make white zombie-type creatures in this world because the mummification process sanctifies the dead. So the idea of the sanctified dead was sort of the genesis of this idea. And then as the world building evolved for Amonkhet, we wanted to have a sort of creepy sense of unease that why is everything so nice here, but there's something going on under the surface. So we had these very neatly wrapped mummies serving fruit bowls and whatever, but underneath, of course, it's all corruption. They are the undead, and something evil is afoot.
One of the tricky things here was we wanted to have a graveyard component, but just 2 blocks earlier, we had Shadows of Innistrad, which also had a graveyard component. So one of the things we did is we tried to carve out slightly different spaces. So what Shadows did is what I call graveyard as a barometer, which is the graveyard as a place for resource to determine things. So if you look at what Shadows of Innistrad did, is it said, oh, what's in the graveyard? It sort of cared about the contents of the graveyard. But here, this is more about the graveyard as a resource. Like you actually have creatures that are in the graveyard that you can get out, and now they're going to be mummies, and you can fight with them. And so what we wanted to do was make it a very different feel, even though there's an interconnect. I mean, in Standard, there's 2 different blocks in Standard that care about the graveyard, but we want them to care about the graveyard just in different ways.
The idea behind Aftermath originally was that we wanted something to sort of call back to Shadows over Innistrad, to sort of connect with that block and power up some of those cards. And so we thought about the idea, what if we had like split cards that were a sorcery on one side and an instant on the other, and we want, because then they would be 2 card types, just like an artifact creature is an artifact and a creature, gets you to Delirium a little faster. If we had a card that was an instant and a sorcery in your graveyard, that would make Delirium power up faster. So that was our starting point with this mechanic, and we came upon the idea, well, this is a graveyard set. It's all about bringing things back from the dead. We have the embalm mechanic. What if there was a spell version of the embalm mechanic, kind of like flashback? So it's a cross between flashback and split cards. And so we thought we could have a split card where you really wanted to go from one to the other. You want to do one first and then do the other one. So we had one half of the card you can cast from your hand, the other half you can only cast from your graveyard.
What we found is they let us tell very interesting stories. A card like Start to Finish tells a very different story depending on whether you look at just the start card, just the finish card, or them both together, in which case it's quite a sad story, unfortunately.
My favorite of the Aftermath cards are ones where you very much have a setup and then a payoff. So a really good example is Mouth to Feed, where one turn I'm creating a hippo, and then the next turn I'm getting rewarded for having that hippo in the first place. But also you as my opponent have this ability to see the second half coming, and if you can respond, if you can kill off my big creatures, including that hippo, well, then you have a benefit, and that creates a really fun dynamic where we have something to fight over and we have something to set up and then knock down, and I love the way those play out.
We have at our disposal in R&D now a graphic designer who works for us, and that is a luxury that is wonderful. It enables us to do things with Magic cards that we've never been able to do before, and it enables us to communicate with our players in a much more intuitive way, where they can just glance at a thing and immediately know something about it before they've perceived what the art is, before they've read a single word on the card. They know something about that card, and that is tremendously powerful. Liz Leo really knocked it out of the park with the Aftermath frames. This was a huge challenge. I was involved in my own way, trying to make sure it all came off, and she really knocked it out of the park with a radical solution, I think.
One of the big things walking in, like when Sean and I sat down and talked about what exactly does an Egyptian set have to have, and we knew the idea that death had to matter, that I really was the whole time focused on, does death matter enough? Is death ever present here? Do we have the sense of death really, really matters? And the neat things, I remember watching the slideshow and seeing all the cards, after I know they're in print and they're done, is saying, you know what? Yeah, we did it. Death matters.
There are lots of ways to love Magic. Some people draft, some brew spicy standard decks, and some bring the characters in the game to life. The terrific crew of Nate Holt and Sean Kornhauser bring you a look into the life of one of Magic's most iconic cosplayers, Christine Sprankle.
Honestly, I don't know what it is, but as you start putting on the armor pieces and start, you know, almost like as you transform into that character, I can't describe what it feels like and what comes over you. But as soon as I have the armor and the wigs on and everything, I don't know what it is, but suddenly I'm just... As soon as I saw the art of the cat god for Amonkhet, I like flipped out and was like, they did that for me. Like, I was like, it's me, because I'm that crazy cat lady.
Christine Sprankle is probably the biggest founder of Magic the Gathering cosplay.
She shows that there's more to Magic than just playing. There's the artistic side.
I think one of the things people don't quite understand or know about cosplay is it's that person's unique take on that character. It's what they love most about that character, so you're not getting an exact representation of that character. You're getting a little piece of that person too. I got into cosplay and I didn't even know I was getting into cosplay. My friend wanted to dress up and go to this nerdy convention because that's what we saw other people do. And we went to the thrift store, made costumes, and I've been cosplaying 13 years ever since. So for most of my costumes, how I start off especially, I love armor. I absolutely love making armor. Everything starts off with a foam pattern. Foam makes really beautiful, flexible armor. This is for Froehlich. She was in the commander set, one of the older planeswalkers. And she has this really weird, like almost wood-like armor on her shins. So I used a wood burning tool and sat there and just kind of made organic wood pattern shapes by just kind of almost squiggly. Just burning the wood tool and with a respirator, because oh my god, be safe, can't, like, respirators, eye goggles, mask, everything when you work with it.
Okay, so
where do you want me to go?
Okay, we two walk up first. Okay. So Christine, you might actually want to change into your boots, not your heels.
I don't know, I might be able to do it.
Because the soil is kind of loose.
Do you need help as I start rolling?
Always safety first.
It's just the stupid leaf things. One of my favorite things about Magic design, though, is you really have to be creative and like fill in like the back of the card pretty much, because you almost never see the back of the character or like their lower half. So you can actually take different ideas from different cards and kind of fill it in like that. Like Elspeth, she's actually just wearing armor from Bant. Well, if you don't know exactly what other pieces of her armor are, well, look at the other Bant Knights, and you can fill it in really easily.
I'm a super shy person and very socially awkward at times. So when I'm in costume, it's a lot easier to connect with other people because they like the same things I do, they're watching the same anime, or they play the same game that I'm dressed up from. And it makes things so much easier when it comes to interacting with people. When I saw Sprinkle cosplaying Outworld as Elspeth, that opened up a whole new avenue for me because I had only been doing anime and gaming cosplay.
Worlds 2011, I honestly, from what my friends had said about it, it sounded like a Magic convention to me. And I had been going to conventions and dressing up for years before that, so I thought I would dress up. When I first walked in and I saw that there was nobody else dressed and everybody was playing, I was like, I might have done something wrong.
Welcome to the Magic the Gathering World Championships 2011.
It's been a lot of fun. I cannot believe how many events they keep on playing. You get so much just cards.
I remember everybody around me talking as though Elspeth herself had entered the auditorium and no one understood what was going on because you didn't typically see this. And I remember lots of other people saying, did Wizards hire this person? She's a professional. I didn't think there was Magic cosplay because we're small, we're niche.
I think it definitely inspired a lot of other people to start cosplaying in Magic as well. Like I said before, it showed that Magic can be much more expressive.
About halfway down, I got stopped by a gentleman in a black shirt that said Magic on it. And he came up and he just stood in front of me and looked very speechless for a bit. And he goes, "Thank you." And I go, "Okay." And he goes, "I'm one of the art directors from Magic the Gathering," and he said, "I've never in my life would expect to see one of my planeswalkers walking around in real life." To this day, I still, every once in a while, if I feel down or something, I go back to an article where they captioned it Christine Sprinkle Knight Errant. And it has just pictures of me and a couple of the art directors and pro players, and I'll forever have that little time in my heart. When you're cosplaying, if anything inspires you and you have that feeling for it, it comes across in the costume. And people don't respond just to the characters most of the time, they respond to the passion and just the effort that you've put into the costume more than the actual end result itself. People ask why bother with the cosplay? And it's well, I am a Magic player, but what I feel like I contribute even greater value is with my cosplay. If I can inspire another generation to be creative and be able to express themselves in the game that they love so much, I feel like I've done something right then, and I have no regrets.
welcome back, and we're about to start some standard rounds here at Pro Tour Amonkhet. Ian Duke is joining me here at the news desk. Tell me, Ian, what can we expect to see out there?
Well, we're going to have a chat through some of the top decks out here in the field right now, but I would say there's sort of a big three here this weekend, but saying the big three, we'll call it the biggest three because that'd be doing a disservice to all the other cool decks that have been showing up here throughout the weekend. The first major one to talk about coming into the tournament, of course, is Mardu Vehicles.
Yes.
And this is kind of a known quantity that we've seen, throughout the last couple seasons of Standard. Nothing huge here as far as innovations with Amonkhet. Some players are mixing in some Glory Bringers and things like that. You can see a couple copies of Canyon Slough in the mana base here to kind of just smooth out the way the deck plays. But more or less, this is a known quantity. And because it's a known quantity, Maria, it actually hasn't been doing that well here this weekend.
Yeah, people were ready for it.
Yeah, absolutely. People are very ready for it. And we'll take a look at the next couple decks here, and we'll dig into exactly why Mardu Vehicles hasn't been succeeding that much. So the next deck I want to talk about is Temur Aetherworks Marvel. You can take a look at the deck list right here. Now, this is using sort of a whole package of energy cards from Kaladesh and Aether Revolt. You've got the classic Servant of the Conduit, Rogue Refiner, Whirler Virtuoso generating energy for you, and of course all glued together with Attune with Ether. And what are we doing with all this energy? Why? We are tapping Aetherworks Marvel and hoping to cast Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, the most powerful Eldrazi in the Standard environment right now. Has a cast trigger that exiles 2 permanents. You actually get that cast trigger when you do cast it off of Aetherworks Marvel. And then, of course, you have a massive 10/10 indestructible +++ after that. So that's your main game plan with Temur Aetherworks Marvel. Now, following up on that, we have Mono Black Zombies. This is one of the breakout decks since Amonkhet, and a breakout deck here this weekend. This is really exciting for me to see. This deck unifies together a bunch of zombies from both Shadows over Innistrad block and Amonkhet, relying on new cards like Lord of the Accursed, Dread Wanderer, and of course Liliana's Mastery at the top of the curve there. Really powerful zombie anthem.
Yeah, a lot of people are wondering if Mono Black Zombies would be an actual deck that we could make in this set. People have been waiting for it for so long, so I'm really happy to see it.
It's been a while since we've had, as we call them, a tribal deck based around a creature type that's really shown up a lot in Standard. And Mono Black Zombies really well positioned here, in part because it absolutely hammers Mardu Vehicles. Mardu Vehicles being an aggressive deck that doesn't really try to interact. Well, the Mono Black Zombies capitalizes on that by just building this huge board of enormous zombies. Now, variant on Mono Black Zombies is actually White Black Zombies. This is kind of the next level version of the deck. It's built to beat the mirror match. You have an extra Lord type effect in terms of Wayward Servant. Binding Mummy also helps you sort of dominate the battlefield in terms of combat. And then very importantly, you also have access to Anguished Unmaking, which is a very big tool against those Aetherworks Marvel decks, either taking out a Marvel that failed to hit on the first activation or taking out Ulamog himself.
It's really interesting for me. I love seeing like Standard draft commons show up in Standard decks, that Binding Mummy spice.
Yeah, and speaking of combos, the next one we have is New Perspectives combo. This is a new deck enabled from Amonkhet and the cycling mechanic. It revolves around casting New Perspectives, an enchantment that lets you draw 3 cards, and then, provided you have enough cards in hand, you can cycle for free. After you have that on the battlefield, you just start cycling through your library until you finally hit Shadow of the Grave. You cast that, you return all those cards that you discarded from your graveyard back to your hand, and just keep on cycling through your deck, and you can generate mana with Vizier of the Tumbling Sands and Shefet Monitor, and finally, you cast Approach of the Second Sun, and then finally, you cast Approach of the Second Sun a second time, and you win the game, and that's all in one turn, and you can do it on turn 6, or even on turn 5, with New Perspectives, just no extra mana, just cycle through and go off from there.
Wow, this deck is so cool.
It's very cool.
How consistent do you think it is?
I think it's very consistent at doing what it does on turn 5, turn 6, in sort of a race-type fashion if you're not interacted with, but it's very fragile to things like counter spells and discard spells.
All right, up next we have blue-red control.
Yeah, speaking of counter spells, this is the traditional control deck in the field right now. It is blue-red control, which is a little unusual throughout Magic's history, but red removal happens to match up really well against the given metagame right now. Magma Spray being one of the key spells, taking out cards like Scrap Heap Scrounger, Relentless Dead. And then, of course, the big payoff for playing a control deck is Torrential Gear Hulk. That's your curve topper. That's really what makes this whole package glued together in such a powerful way.
The Hulk is back.
Yep.
Sweltering Sun's probably pretty good against those zombie decks.
Absolutely, yeah. It really just helps sweep the board there. Now, Black-Green Cryptolith, right? This is one I haven't seen too much on camera yet. I'm hoping to get deck tech in here later on in the day, but this is a really cool deck that only a few players are playing, but I think it's been doing fairly well so far. This is kind of reminiscent of the old Cryptolith Rights decks from a couple standard seasons past, but basically the idea is you get lots of small creatures in the battlefield. Cryptolith Right lets you tap them for mana, and then you get sort of a sacrifice engine in play revolving around Zulaport Cutthroat, Catacomb Sifter, and Yeheni Undying Partisan, so you can kind of keep cycling those creatures into the graveyard, scrying, gaining life, draining your opponent, and so on and so forth. Next deck I want to talk about is White-Blue Spirits. This is also a deck that's shown up a little bit in the past, but hasn't shown up so much since Reflector Mage has been gone from the format. But this is, revolving around interactions between cards like Mausoleum Wanderer, Rattle Chains, Spell Queller, and then also leveraging the power of Archangel Avacyn, which is really, really well positioned this weekend against all those zombie decks that can just fly over the top and end the game really quickly while also staying back to be a resilient blocker. So really cool deck here. Again, this is not one I've personally seen in the booth so far yet, but hopefully we'll see some more of it this weekend because it looks pretty cool to me.
Awesome, Ian. Thank you so much. Well, it sounds like our players are ready and we are ready to get back into Standard. Here at Pro Tour Amonkhet, we're about to see Sam Black with his crazy Obs on Tokens deck, which I've had some friends telling me is really, really, really fun to watch. So I'm going to be excited to see that versus Zen Takahashi with his Mono Black Zombies deck. And we heard you talk a little bit about how that deck works, so I'm excited to see that in action. Let's take a look at our leaderboard, if we can, for just a second, going into round 12 here to see how our players are doing here at Pro Tour Amonkhet. We're getting into Standard. This is really where we have to make it count. We've gotten through all the draft, so it's just Standard from here on out. Let's take a look. Chris Fennell sitting there in first place overall. His record 10-1. That's where you want to be right now going into Standard. Eric Froehlich also sitting at 10-1 on Team Channel Fireball Ice. Martin Mueller there at 10-1 as well on Team Genesis, which has been having an absolutely fantastic day here at Pro Tour Amonkhet. Christian Calcano sitting at 9-2. A member of MTG Bent card. Ray Perez Jr. also at 9-2. Pierre Dejean, who we saw draft earlier this morning. You can go back and watch that, sitting at 9-2. We have Li Shitian, currently ranked 8th in the world at 9-2. Ken Yukihiro at 9-2. Gerard Fabiano also sitting at 9-2. And wrapping out our 9-2s, we have Jerry Thompson and Timothy Wu. All right. So we're having a little bit of a delay, so we're going to talk about a few more decks before we actually hit our feature match area. So we're going to talk, we got through Blue-White Spirits, and we're up next at Teamer Energy, I believe. So tell me a little bit about Teamer Energy and how it differs from, say, for example, Teamer Marvel.
Yeah, so absolutely. There are a lot of cards in common here between Teamer Energy and Teamer Marvel. Teamer Energy is a little bit more of a mid-range beatdown deck, I guess I would call it. So you're still leveraging all those energy interactions. Cards like Harness Lightning, of course, just always useful in any deck here. But we do see addition of things like Bristling Hydra, just a strong, resilient beatdown creature. Also a couple copies of Glorybringer from Amonkhet, one of the most powerful Amonkhet cards, but has struggled somewhat to find a home, just given the archetypes that have been popular here this weekend. This looks like one of the best versions of a Glorybringer deck to me, though, just because you're getting on board early. You have a lot of interaction through your energy cards, through your planeswalkers, and then Glorybringer just kind of comes over the top and gives you that advantage on the battlefield.
I was wondering when we were going to see Glorybringer make a break for it in Standard. Here it is.
Yep, absolutely. We've certainly seen it in Draft a little bit here this weekend, but also a major player in Standard as well.
All right, well, this time we're for sure, our players are ready, and we are ready. So let's get down to our feature match area for round 12 here at Pro Tour Amonkhet.